Thank you. My name is Stephen Scarth. I'm Head of Public Services at PRONI. If however, you're expecting to see a scantily clad Rihanna, I'm afraid you're going to have to go next door to the Odyssey. If, however, you want to hear about local history, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the very first in a 7-part lecture series organised jointly by PRONI and the Open University in Ireland. The series is going to run until April of next year, and we hope it'll be the first of a number of partnerships between ourselves and the Open University. Before starting, I'm going to make a few housekeeping announcements. Firstly, the ladies and gents is out in the atrium. For those of you who have not been to PRONI before, it's on the left-hand side, and it is clearly marked. Secondly, we're not planning on having a fire, but in the event the alarm goes off, please make your way to the assembly point, which is at the marina to the rear of the apartments behind the Odyssey. There will be staff who will accompany you. In terms of tonight's programme, we're expecting proceedings to finish about 8 p.m. PRONI, though, does remain open until 8:45, and depending on what time we actually get finished, we hope to be able to provide a whistle-stop tour of the public facilities to anybody who's interested. So that being the case, just come and see me at the end of the event. If you don't want to go on the tour, I'd also recommend the launch exhibition, which is next door, which is entitled The Century of Change, Conflict and Transformation. And that's the flagship exhibition which launched early. You may have noticed there's some cameras around the room. We're filming this lecture and indeed the series. I'd like to thank Bill very much from NI Direct for taking the time to do the filming. We're intending to put the lectures out on the internet, on the institutional sites. We're going to try and make use of social media as well. So we hope to set up a YouTube channel. So you'll be able to relive this experience again in Technicolor. Okay, that's all I'd like to say. You've not come to hear me, so I'm handing over to Dr. Janice Holmes from the Open University.
Great, thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming, and it's always a thrill, really, because when you lecture to undergraduates, which I don't really do very much of anymore, or you give lectures within the university context, there's always sort of like 4 people turn up. But when you give a lecture to the general public, it's always wonderful to get such a full audience. So I'd like to say thanks to Stephen and to the staff of PRONI, who have been absolutely fantastic at helping me get the lectures together and get organized and things, and to provide so much support. And it's really a pleasure to be able to have these lectures here in their brand new facilities, which I hope you'll get the chance to use in the future. I hope that the series of lectures which we're launching tonight will be an entertaining and informative series. Over the next 7 months, myself and 2 of my colleagues from within the Open University, both of whom are historians, and one of whom is here tonight, so I'm going to make her really embarrassed and say Alwyn Purdue, Dr. Purdue down back in the corner there, and another colleague of mine, Dr. Barry Sheehan, who lives in Cork, and so couldn't be here tonight. We'll be introducing you to the study of local history in Ireland. All of us are involved in one way, shape, or form with the Open University's master's program in local history, which has been running for the last couple of years. And we've drawn on the material within that course to inform the lectures that we'll be giving here. We really hope that the lectures are going to be a balance of 2 things. Right? We're scholars, so we like information, and so on the first part, we hope that the lectures will provide an overview of the subject that we're talking about, its historical background, how historians have talked about it and thought about that topic, and how it intersects with the study of local history. Now, secondly, though, and more practically, we also hope that the lectures will enable you to think about the topic and to use it in your own study of your own local area, if that is indeed something that you desire. So we're really hoping that the lectures will have 2 purposes, one of which is to improve your knowledge and understanding of the subject area, and secondly, to enable you to engage in local history research of your own. Now, I should probably confess right at the start that in both senses of the word, I am not a local historian, and I'm sure you've already worked that out already by now, despite my attempts to put on a Northern Irish accent. I'm originally from Canada, and although I have studied, lived, and worked in Northern Ireland for over 20 years now. I should also confess that I'm not a local historian, and I'm actually a historian of religion by training. In particular, my area of particular interest is 19th and 20th century British and Irish Protestantism. So up until, I know, not controversial or anything. Now, up until recently, really, local history as a discipline never really featured in my research. I really saw churches as structures, and I researched them, and I wasn't so aware of the locality. And it was only really when I got involved doing the writing and the research for the local history MA at the OU that I started to really explore what local history was all about, and to get interested in doing some of it for myself. But I'm going to talk more about that later at the end. So right now, what I would like to do is to start really the basic subject matter of the talk by addressing the question, what is local history? Now, to do that, I have invited 3 individuals who know much more about local history than I do to help me. So I'd like to introduce you very briefly to a panel of experts which I have brought along, who will be, when I'm finished giving my lecture, responding to what I've said and providing their own slant on it. So to that end, I'd like to introduce you to Professor Raymond Gillespie from the National University of Ireland at Maynooth, who's been very much involved with their MA in local history, and my direct competitor. I'd also like to introduce you to Roddy Hegarty, who is the director of the Cardinal Thomas O'Fee Memorial Library and Archive in County Armagh, and who's also very much involved with the Federation for Ulster Local Studies. And finally, I'd like to introduce you then to Dr. Bill McAfee, who is no doubt well known to many of you as a local historian and is retired lecturer from the University of Ulster. I've asked each one of them, as I said, to prepare a short reflection on what I'm about to say now, in the true spirit of discussion, and that I might not quite have the story exactly right. Then what we'd like to do is, if everyone's willing, is to open the discussion up at the end to any questions or comments or thoughts or reflections that you might have from your perspective, and to see what we come up with at the end. And when we're done, then there'll still be 15 minutes left, hopefully, if we've planned it all right. And that'll give me an opportunity to come back and to say something about the practical side of things, about how and what the next steps might be for you to embark on a local history project. So let's turn now to what I would consider to be the main part of the lecture. Okay, so I wanted to start really with a little bit of looking backwards. Now, in the introduction to a book which was written back in the 1970s by a Canadian historian of Ireland, Donald Atkinson, it was a local history of Island McVeigh in County Antrim. Now, Don Atkinson was my master's supervisor, and he's well known for making very blunt and at times rather shocking statements about Irish history. And in his introduction to Island McVeigh's history, which he wrote, he made a very blunt statement about Irish local history. But the reason why many professional historians didn't attempt it is because it was devilish hard work. Now, despite this warning, many people over the past 400 years have engaged in Irish local history. So if we are to try and understand what local history is, it might be helpful if we were to start with what it used to be, or what it started out being, before it became what it is today. So what exactly was then local history in the past? Now, the practice of local history in Ireland has a long and impressive pedigree, which can be dated back to medieval times. Up until the mid-20th century, this kind of scholarship was carried out by amateurs, mainly because there were no professional historians really floating around. Now, these amateurs were usually members of the Irish and British upper classes, such as the gentry or the clergy, And in the 19th century, significantly, members of the British civil service who came and lived in Ireland, and increasingly, as time went on, members of the Catholic middle classes. The focus for much of this scholarship was topographical. These individuals were interested in the landscape, what the countryside looked like, its distinctive features. But there was also interest in the production of genealogies of important families, of church histories, of the origin of Irish place names, and so on. And while some fine examples of scholarship were produced, much of this material was based on what historians today would consider a kind of a narrow definition of what place actually meant. And at times it wasn't particularly critical. It was a little bit, shall we say, gushing at times. Now, interest in the Irish past emerged a little bit more in the 16th and the 17th centuries amongst both the native communities who were here already, the Gaelic Irish, and the settler communities who were arriving with the plantation and other in-migrations. Catholic priests like Geoffrey Keating and Michael O'Clery each wrote important and significant narrative histories in Irish. The Foras Fassa Éireann in 1634, and the Annals of the Four Masters, which was written between 1632 and 1636. These chronological accounts of the important events that had occurred in early Irish history remain highly significant sources for historians today. But equally, Anglican bishops from the Church of Ireland, like James Ussher and Narcissus Marsh, they also engaged in scholarship and in manuscript collecting. William Petty was a professor of anatomy at Oxford, and he came to Ireland to conduct the Down Survey, a very large mapping exercise in the 1650s. And it was to enable the redistribution of confiscated land. But again, he published extensively on Irish topography and Irish population, and was a founder member of the Dublin Philosophical Society, one of the first learned societies ever to be formed in Ireland. Now, this activity that these guys were doing is not really what we would call local history today, but it was local history in the sense that people living in Ireland really for the very first time began to be interested in the places around them, to wonder how they had become the way that they were. And no one had really asked those kinds of questions before, and more importantly, had started to write about them. Now, in the 18th century, this interest in the Irish past had turned to objects in the physical landscape, particularly ancient monuments like ring forts, standing stones, high crosses, ruined monasteries, and round towers. All of these physical objects are called antiquities, and their study, called antiquarianism, soon spread to include other related subjects, such as Gaelic literature, which usually survived in manuscript form, and the Gaelic language, both written and spoken. So more and more people then become interested in collecting and trying to preserve all these manuscripts that they find hanging about. And a number of individuals are also interested in collecting folklore, the stories and oral traditions recounted and told by the Irish poor. Now, while place was important for much of this study, it wasn't necessarily, the focus wasn't necessarily on any specific place. And while the driving force behind them was a genuine interest in the Irish past, and a desire to protect and preserve it, these cultural activities often contributed to wider political and, at times, nationalist agendas. So I'll just talk a bit more about what I mean by that. Because in the 18th century, it was really the communities who were most interested in Irish antiquities and Irish language manuscripts was first and earliest promoted amongst Irish Protestant elites, particularly country gentlemen, Anglican clergymen, and members of the professional classes. Now, these individuals were the most recent in what we all know were the successive waves of immigration from England and Scotland. They were the dominant class in Ireland, and from the 1690s, with the implementation of the penal laws against Catholic economic and political power, they exerted exclusive control over the Irish Parliament. Cultural activity in the 18th century then reflected their growing confidence and their sense of investment in their new homeland. So it's unsurprising then that they become interested in promoting the cultural environment in which they found themselves.